I camped near an old radio relay station because it sat in a wide bowl of land where nothing else existed. No marked trail cut through it. No sign warned people away. The dirt road ended in a flat turnoff, and the tower rose from the middle of a gravel pad like a thin black needle. The metal was dull and pitted. The support legs were bolted into concrete blocks that had cracked from frost. Wind moved through the guy wires and made a low sound that came and went, steady but never the same twice. I liked that kind of quiet, felt honest. I parked my truck with the nose pointed out, habit from years of camping alone. I shut off the engine and listened. Nothing but wind across grass and the soft tick of cooling metal. The sky was clear, the kind of clear you only get far from towns. Stars pressed down hard and close. I set my tent a little way from the truck, on packed dirt that had probably been driven on years ago when the station still mattered. I cooked a simple meal and cleaned up right after. I left nothing out. I always do. Animals learn fast. As it got dark, the temperature dropped fast. I put on another layer and walked around the tower once, slow, just to look. The ladder rungs were bent in places. A rusted sign hung crooked, the letters almost gone. The equipment shed at the base had no door, just a frame and broken hinges. Inside, there was nothing but dust, mouse droppings, and old bolt holes in the floor where racks had been pulled. No wires, no power, no sign of recent use. Felt dead in the normal way old things feel dead. I went to bed early. I lay there and listened to wind push through grass. Around midnight, it picked up. The guy wires started to sing, thin and tight, like fingers on glass. I remember thinking how the sound seemed to move, even though I knew it was the same wind hitting different angles. Around 1 in the morning, my truck radio came on. It did not blast. It rose out of nothing, low and sudden, the way electronics do when power hits them. Static first, a rough wash of sound that filled the space between notes. I sat up in my sleeping bag and held still. I knew I had turned everything off. I always do. The static shifted, and then there were voices layered into it. Not words, just pieces, tones and shapes that rose and fell. It sounded like several people speaking at once through something spinning fast. I could not catch a single clear sound. It was close enough to feel, not loud, but present. I stayed still for a few seconds and listened. The voices did not stop. They changed. The pitch dipped, then rose. I could feel my chest tighten. Radios pick up junk sometimes. I knew that. Old stations bleed. Atmospheric noise can stack and fold in strange ways. Still, hearing it at that hour out there hit harder than it should have. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The ground was cold through my boots. The sound shifted right away. The static thinned. The voices lowered, not quieter, but slower, like something easing back. I took a few steps toward the truck. Gravel crunched under my feet. With each step, the sound bent. It felt tied to my position, like my body mattered to it. I stopped and the sound steadied. I stepped back and it rose again. I walked toward the tower and it dropped, stretched and blurred. The closer I got, the less sharp it became, as if the signal was being pulled apart. My skin crawled, but my head stayed clear. I was not thinking about ghosts or anything like that. I was thinking about metal and air and the way antennas work. I reached the truck and opened the door. The radio was on, tuned to nothing. The display glowed dim. I reached under the dash and flipped the battery disconnect. The radio died at once. The night went empty. Wind, grass, wires. That was it. I stood there longer than I needed to. Silence felt thick. I closed the door and walked back to the tent. I did not sleep right away. My mind kept replaying the way the sound changed when I moved. Eventually, the wind evened out and I drifted off. 10 minutes later, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching. It was close, not heavy, slow and even. The sound of bare feet on small stone has a soft drag to it, a damp scrape that carries. This had that sound. One step, pause, another step, no shuffle, no rush. Just a steady pace moving around the truck. I did not move. I did not reach for anything. I listened. The steps circled once. The wind did not cover them. The guy wires did not hide them. Whoever it was did not cough or breathe loud. They did not trip or slide. They took their time. The steps stopped near the back of the truck. I could picture the shape of it without seeing it. The tailgate, the hitch, the spare tire. I waited for the sound of a hand on metal. It did not come. After a long stretch, the steps started again. Same slow pace. They moved away, then came back. A full circle. I stayed in the tent until the sound faded into the wind. I did not hear it leave. I did not hear it approach the tower. It just stopped being there. Morning came thin and gray. I did not feel rested. The first thing I did was check the ground. The gravel pad showed it clear as day. Bare footprints pressed into damp dirt where the gravel thinned. No tread, no shoe marks. Toes and arches, narrow heel. The prints looped around the truck, then curved toward the tower. They made a wide circle at the base, careful, even spacing, then crossed themselves once and ended. There were no prints leading away. I walked the area slow. I checked the edges where grass met dirt. Nothing. I followed the line twice. It did not break. It just stopped. I felt cold then, not from fear, but from the clean fact of it. I went to the tower and looked closer. The ground near the base was churned where water ran down from the concrete pads. Mud there would hold prints better than gravel. I found more. The same bare feet pacing tight around the bolts. Then I saw the ladder. The lowest rung was just high enough that someone could step up without leaving a clear print beneath it. On the concrete, there were smears where mud had been wiped by skin. The shed frame held the answer. A narrow service hatch in the floor had been left open under a sheet of rusted metal. It led to a shallow cable trench, half collapsed, running under the pad and out toward the slope where rock took over and prints would not hold. Someone had used the tower as cover. They moved barefoot to stay quiet. They knew how sound traveled there. They knew radios. The night noise made sense then. Old relay towers act like giant antennas even when dead. Wind and static load the metal. A human body near it can change the field. So can a truck. So can movement. Someone with a small transmitter or even a broken device could make a mess of overlapping signals. Enough to scare someone off. Enough to test if anyone was there. I packed fast. I did not tear anything. I left no trash. I drove out with the radio off and the disconnect still cut. When I hit pavement, I pulled over and checked under the truck. Mud streaked the frame near the hitch. I never camped there again. I stopped seeking places that promise total isolation. Some spots are empty for reasons that have nothing to do with beauty or distance. I learned to pay attention to what old structures can still do, and to the people who know how to use them. I decided to go camping alone one weekend, just to get away from everything. Work had piled up for months, and the city felt like it was closing in. I wanted a place where I could disappear for a few days, somewhere quiet, isolated, with no trails, no people, no cell signal. I drove for hours, leaving the highway behind and following a narrow dirt road that twisted through hills and dense trees. Eventually, the road ended at a small clearing near a creek. It wasn't marked on any map. There were no signs, no campsites, no signs of other hikers. Just an open space surrounded by trees, the creek running over rocks, and the smell of wet earth. It was perfect. I set up camp early in the afternoon. The ground was uneven and hard in some spots, soft and muddy in others, but I found a flat area just high enough above the creek to stay dry if the water rose. I pitched my tent carefully, making sure the stakes went deep into the dirt. I collected firewood from the surrounding forest, stacking small sticks first and larger logs on top, arranging them so that I could light a fire easily in the evening. I brought my backpack to the tent, checked my supplies, and took a moment to just sit on a rock by the water. The creek flowed steadily, cold and clear, slipping around moss-covered stones. There was a strange kind of calm in the way the water moved, like it had been doing the same thing for 100 years and didn't care about anyone noticing. As the sun began to set, the forest changed. Shadows stretched long, the air cooled, and the sounds of the day quieted. Birds stopped calling. Only the creek made noise now, tumbling over rocks, a soft, constant murmur that filled the empty spaces. I cooked a small dinner over my camp stove, ate slowly, and cleaned everything up. I didn't leave any trash. I didn't want animals or anyone else coming near my spot. By the time it got dark, the sky was clear and full of stars. The Milky Way arched across the night, brilliant and sharp in the absence of city light. I thought about how long it had been since I had seen a sky like this. The air smelled of pine and damp soil, sharp and clean. I went to sleep early, but the forest had other plans. Around 1 in the morning, I woke to a sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it didn't make sense. It was soft, deliberate, a crunch on leaves and dirt. I listened closely, heart beating a little faster, and realized it was coming from just outside my tent. Something was moving slowly, carefully. I could hear the faint snap of sticks underfoot and the shift of something being lifted and set down. My first thought was that it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer, but the movement had a purpose. There was a rhythm to it, a careful adjustment, like someone was examining something, testing it. I froze. The sound moved around the edge of my tent and then stopped. I held my breath. After a long pause, the rustling faded. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I got up with the first light. Everything looked ordinary. The fire pit I had used was still intact. My tent was as I had left it. But when I walked down toward the creek, I saw footprints, barefoot, wide, and oddly long, pressed into the soft mud by the water. They circled the tent once, close enough to be deliberate, and then continued toward the trees. I followed them as far as I dared, but they disappeared under leaves and pine needles. I had no idea who or what had left them. No one had been on the road. No one could have driven in quietly, and I was alone. I tried to shake it off. I spent the day fishing and exploring the area around the creek, moving slowly and deliberately, checking every bend of the water and every small patch of forest nearby. There were no camps, no litter, no sign of human activity. The forest was empty, silent except for water and birds. It felt more lonely than I expected. Every now and then, a breeze would stir, making the trees whisper, and I could almost feel eyes on me. But I told myself it was just the isolation, my imagination running wild. That night, I stayed awake. I didn't want a repeat of the previous night, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't being careless with food or gear. I listened. The wind was soft, the creek steady, the world otherwise quiet. And then I heard it, breathing, slow and deliberate, right outside my tent. I froze, straining to hear. After a moment, a soft tapping began. 3 taps in quick succession, a pause, then 3 more. It was not random, not harsh, not frantic. It was measured, like someone was trying to communicate without startling me. I didn't move, didn't reach for anything, just stayed still, listening. The tapping continued for several minutes, the pattern repeating. I felt the air shift slightly, the fabric of the tent press in as if someone leaned closer, then moved back. Eventually, the sound faded with the wind. I stayed awake, alert, until the first light of dawn. When the sun finally broke through the trees, I got up slowly. The forest looked ordinary again, serene, but I could still feel the tension from the night. I walked around my campsite carefully, checking the ground. The footprints were still there, wet, bare, long, with toes that spread unusually wide. They circled the tent again and led toward the trees, but never went far enough to show a trail. I realized then that whoever had been there had come and gone silently, using the natural cover and shadows to avoid leaving obvious tracks. They had been close enough to observe me, but careful enough not to confront or threaten. I packed up, taking everything down systematically. Tent, sleeping bag, firewood, stove, all carefully stowed. I made sure nothing was left behind. I crossed the creek carefully, slipping once on wet stone, and returned to the road. The dirt track was still empty, just the way I had left it. I started the truck and drove off slowly, constantly glancing in the rearview mirror at the forest. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I never returned to that spot. I still fish and still camp, but I choose places differently now. I watch for signs of others, even when no one is supposed to be there. I learned that isolation doesn't always mean emptiness, and sometimes the forest hides more than just animals. The person or people who had been near my tent had used experience, patience, and silence. I would never know exactly why, but the lesson was clear. Respect the unseen because they notice, and some places are not as empty as they appear. Even when everything seems calm and beautiful, someone might be watching, quietly, and waiting. That awareness has stayed with me ever since, guiding where I go and how I move in the wilderness. I chose the site because it was listed as low use. The trailhead sat off a county road that barely saw traffic, and the campsite was another 6 miles in, past a stretch of switchbacks most people avoided. I wanted quiet and distance. I wanted a place where I could hike all day, set camp, and not see anyone else. The permit allowed one night only. I printed it, folded it, and left it in my pack. The hike in was dry and slow. The forest was mixed pine and fir, with long stretches of deadfall that forced careful steps. The ground was uneven and chewed up by old runoff channels. I noticed early on that there were boot prints ahead of me, but they were faint and filled with dust. Not fresh, probably someone who had been in days earlier. The farther I went, the fewer signs of people there were. The trail narrowed and then widened again in places where water had eaten away at the edge. Some of the blazes were missing. Others were carved into trees that were already dead. By mid-afternoon, the air cooled and the light changed. The campsite sat in a shallow basin near a dry creek bed. There were no structures, no tables, no fire ring built by the park. Just a flat area where the ground had been packed down by repeated use. The trees around it were scarred low, bark shaved away where people had leaned gear or tied lines. A few nails were still driven into trunks, rusted and bent. I set my tent at the edge of the clearing, facing the creek bed. The soil there was hard and pale, cracked like dried clay. I could tell water ran through during spring melt, but now it was just stone and dust. I filtered water from a steep uphill and cooked as the sun dropped. The forest settled into evening without much sound. No wind, no birds. The quiet felt thick but not wrong. Just empty. After dark, I sat in my tent and listened. My headlamp lit the fabric walls, turning them a dull yellow. Every now and then, something moved farther out, a branch shifting or a small animal passing through leaves. Normal sounds. I slept in short stretches, waking often but falling back asleep. Sometime after midnight, a sound pulled me fully awake. Footsteps. Not close but not far either. Slow and steady. One step, then another, spaced evenly. They came from the direction of the trail, then stopped. I waited, holding my breath, listening. After a long pause, the steps resumed, moving across the clearing, cutting a wide arc instead of approaching directly. I stayed still. No zipper noise, no shifting. The steps circled once, then stopped again. I could hear breathing now, faint but present, the sound of air moving through someone's nose. It stayed just beyond the edge of my light. Minutes passed. Then the steps moved away, back toward the trees, fading until they were gone. I didn't hear anything else after that. Eventually, exhaustion took over and I slept. Morning light came gray and thin. The forest looked the same, but the clearing didn't feel empty anymore. I stepped out and scanned the ground. Footprints crossed the hard soil. Boot prints, deep enough to show tread, overlapping my own from the day before. They circled my tent once, then headed back toward the trail. The dust inside the prints hadn't settled yet. They were recent. I packed quickly. I didn't eat. I broke camp with careful movements, keeping my head up, listening. As I started hiking out, I noticed something else. Along the trail, every few hundred yards, there were small piles of stones stacked on logs or at the base of trees. Not cairns meant to mark the path. These were placed off to the side, visible only if you looked for them. They followed the trail in both directions. The farther I went, the more of them I saw. About halfway out, I found a place where someone had stepped off the trail recently. The brush was pushed aside. Branches snapped. The ground showed a clear path running parallel to the trail, just far enough away to stay hidden. Whoever it was had been walking there for some time. matching my pace, keeping distance. I stopped and listened. Nothing. The forest was still. I started again, slower now, watching reflections in my peripheral vision, checking behind trees. The feeling of being followed didn't fade. It sharpened. Near the last mile, I came across an old campsite that wasn't on any map. The ground was scorched black in several spots. Burned trash was scattered around, half buried. A torn tarp hung from a tree, shredded by weather. There were dozens of footprints pressed into the dirt, layered and overlapping, like people had stayed there for long periods. Some of the prints were barefoot. At the edge of that clearing sat a stack of flat stones arranged into a low square. Inside it were personal items: a cracked mirror, plastic comb, empty food wrappers, a notebook swollen from moisture. The pages stuck together, but I could see drawings pressed into the paper, outlines of the trail, the basin, the clearing where I had camped. My campsite. I didn't touch anything. I walked away slowly, then faster, then as fast as I could without running. The trailhead came into view at last. My car sat alone, dusted with pollen. Nothing looked disturbed. At home, I reported what I found to the ranger office. I showed photos of the footprints, the stone markers, the campsite. They didn't look surprised. They told me the area had been closed before, reopened, then quietly downgraded. People drifted through. Some stayed longer than they were supposed to. A few lived out there seasonally, avoiding contact, marking trails in ways only they understood. The ranger explained that some individuals followed hikers to see who was alone, who was prepared, who might panic. Most encounters ended without incident. A few did not. The reports were filed as warnings and then buried. No crime meant no action. The site I stayed at was still listed because removing it would require funding and review. It was easier to let permits expire and hope people chose different trails. I stopped camping alone after that. Not because of fear of the woods, but because of what hides in plain sight when rules fade and maps stop being updated. The danger wasn't something unknown. It was someone watching, patient and practiced, using the quiet the way others use walls and doors. That night wasn't about being hunted by something unreal. It was about realizing how thin the line is between solitude and isolation, and how easily a place can turn from empty to occupied without ever feeling crowded. I went fishing. That was the whole reason. No reset, no escape story, no big plan. 3 days on a small backcountry lake that rarely showed up on maps. I had fished it once years earlier and remembered clean water, slow currents, and no motor noise. Storms were forecast to move in by evening, so I got there early and set camp without rushing. The sky had that flat gray look that presses down on everything. Wind slid across the water in long sheets and made the surface darken in bands. I hauled the canoe up on a rock shelf and tied it off with a short length of rope. Snug but not tight. The water level could rise fast if rain hit hard. I pitched my tent well above the shoreline, tucked into a stand of short pines that had grown crooked from wind. The ground was hard-packed dirt with scattered needles and no soft moss, which I liked. Stayed dry. I cooked early, cleaned up right away, and secured all my gear. I expected rain, not company. By the time darkness settled in, the lake had gone still. The wind died off in a way that felt sudden, like someone had closed a door. Clouds blocked the moon. I lay in the tent and listened to water slap once in a while against stone. No frogs, no insects, just that empty sound that happens when weather is building somewhere else. Sometime after I drifted off, I heard movement near the shore. It was close enough that I could place it without guessing. Stone on stone. The canoe shifted. I heard the rope tighten, then loosen. The hull lifted slightly, then settled back down with care. No scrape, no bump. Whoever it was took time with it. I stayed still and listened. The sound ended clean, not rushed. I assumed another camper had come in late and saw my canoe sitting a little crooked. People do that sometimes, trying to be decent. I did not hear footsteps leave, but I did not hear them arrive either. Sound carries strange over water at night. I rolled over and went back to sleep. Rain came before dawn, light but steady. I got up early and brewed coffee under the tarp. The lake looked flat and pale, the far shore smudged by mist. After eating, I packed light and pushed off to fish. I paddled slow and steady, hugging the shoreline first, then cutting across the open center. I took my time and checked every bend. No camps, no fire rings, no docks, no boats pulled up and hidden, no trails cut into the brush. The banks were steep in places and smooth in others, but they all showed the same thing. No recent traffic. The lake was smaller than I remembered, or maybe it just felt that way once I traced every edge. I finished the loop by late morning and returned to camp. The canoe sat exactly where I had left it after fishing, ropes still tied the same way. I checked the knots. They were unchanged. That bothered me more than if they had been retied. The afternoon dragged. The storm stalled somewhere else. The air felt heavy, like it was holding breath. I caught fish and cleaned them far from camp, washed my hands in the lake, and returned before dark. I secured the canoe again, this time pulling it higher and wedging a rock against the stern. I noted the position of everything without thinking about it. Habit does that. Night came quiet again. No rain, no wind. I lay awake longer than usual, watching the dark inside the tent shift as clouds moved. Around 3 in the morning, I heard breathing outside. It was close enough that I could tell it was human. Slow and controlled. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Not labored, not tired, just steady. Came from the side of the tent near my head. I could picture the space where it came from, less than an arm's length away. I held still and listened. The breathing stayed for a long stretch. Then came the knocking. 3 taps on the tent wall, spaced evenly. Not hard, not light, just enough to feel through the fabric. A pause. 3 more. The pattern repeated. It was not random. It was measured, like someone checking to see if I was awake without wanting to scare me into noise. I did not move. I did not reach for anything. I slowed my own breathing and waited. The taps came again, same spacing, same pressure. Then the breathing shifted slightly, as if the person leaned closer. The tent fabric moved inward just a little and then settled back. After that, there was nothing. No footsteps leaving. No sound of water. Just silence pressing in again. I stayed awake until the sky began to lighten. My body tense in a way that burned energy without movement. At first light, I got up and stepped out. The air was cold and smelled clean. The canoe was still in place, rock still wedged. The rope lay as it had the night before. I scanned the ground near camp and saw nothing at first. Then I went down to the rocks at the waterline. Wet footprints marked the stone where the lake lapped against it. Bare feet, longer than mine, with toes that spread wide when weight pressed down. The impressions were clear in the thin film of algae and silt. They came from the water, moved toward the canoe, then turned and headed upslope before breaking apart where the ground dried. I followed them until they vanished. I did not search far. I already knew what I needed to know. Someone had approached from the lake, not the woods. Someone comfortable enough to move barefoot over sharp rock. Someone who had taken the time to adjust my canoe twice, once in the dark and once earlier without leaving signs, and then returned to test if I would respond. I packed without delay. I did not eat. I did not fish again. I loaded the canoe and pushed off, keeping my paddle stroke slow and even. I did not look back. The explanation came together as I moved across the water. The lake had no trails because access was easiest by water. Anyone living rough nearby would use it as a road, not a destination. The canoe adjustment made sense then. If my canoe floated free during a storm, it would drift and draw attention. Keeping it secure kept the shoreline quiet. The breathing and knocking were not threats. They were checks. Someone gauging whether I would panic, whether I would make noise, whether I would leave. The footprints told me the rest. Bare feet leave no tracks on dry ground and little sound at night. Wide toes spread weight and soften steps. Someone had learned how to move that way over time. Someone who used the lake often enough to treat it like their own space. I reached the far shore and followed the outlet stream until it widened into a path I recognized. When I loaded the truck and drove away, I felt relief settle in layers, slow and heavy. I still fish. I still camp. But I no longer assume silence means no one else is there. Some people live inside quiet places the way others live inside towns, and they notice when something changes. I went out there to photograph stars because the place looked empty on every map I checked. A wide stretch of public land hours from the nearest town. No campgrounds, no facilities, no lights. Just flat red dirt, low scrub brush, and a horizon that felt too far away. The kind of place where the sky feels close because nothing reaches up to interrupt it. I had been restless for months and wanted something simple and quiet. The plan was to set up, shoot long exposures until morning, sleep a few hours, then leave before the heat set in. We drove in late afternoon while the ground still shimmered. The dirt road ended without warning. No sign, no fence, no tire ruts beyond a certain point. We parked where the ground was firm enough not to sink and walked the rest with our gear. The silence stood out right away. No insects, no birds, just the sound of our boots crunching on grit and the wind brushing low plants. The scrub was spread thin, each bush its own island. No trees tall enough to block the sky. That was why we chose it. We pitched 2 tents a short distance apart so we wouldn't kick dust into each other's space. Both were modern nylon backpacking tents, light poles, clean fabric, bright colors that looked wrong against the red ground. We anchored them with stakes and weighted the corners with rocks because the soil was loose. The sun dropped fast. The heat left the ground and went straight up, taking the warmth with it. By the time the stars started to show, the temperature had already fallen hard. I set up my tripod and camera and started shooting as the sky darkened. The Milky Way came in slow and heavy, like spilled chalk. Every exposure took minutes. In between, I checked batteries, lenses, settings. The horizon stayed clear in all directions. No headlights, no distant towns, nothing blinking or moving. It felt like standing inside a bowl with the universe poured over it. Around midnight, when my eyes were adjusted and the ground had turned black, something shifted the shape of the darkness beyond our tents. At first it looked like a trick of the headlamp beam, just a different texture where the light faded. But the shape stayed when the beam moved away. A low triangle, darker than the night around it. That was when it became clear there was another tent out there. It sat farther away from our setup, maybe 30 or 40 yards off, angled slightly away from us. It wasn't catching light the same way ours did. The material looked heavy, dull, and uneven. It hadn't been there when we arrived. I knew that because the ground was flat and open, and I'd scanned the area for framing before placing my tripod. We walked toward it with our headlamps. The ground between us and the tent was undisturbed. No footprints, no drag marks, no crushed brush. The dirt had a thin crust on top that breaks easily. It was smooth and untouched, like it had been swept. Up close, the tent was old. Canvas, thick and sagging, stained dark in places like it had been wet and dried again many times. The zipper was metal and rusted solid, frozen in place. The poles were wood, worn smooth by handling, with splits sealed long ago by tar or pitch. The stakes were iron rods hammered deep, the heads flattened from repeated strikes. None of it looked recent. None of it matched anything people use now. The smell came next. Stale fabric, old sweat, plastic, something faint and sour underneath, like a long emptied bottle left closed too long. We worked the zipper until it gave a few inches and then jammed again. The opening was enough to look inside. The beam of the headlamp swept over a flattened sleeping bag pressed thin and hard like it had been laid on for a long time without being fluffed. The fabric was worn to a shine in places. There was no pad under it, just dirt shaped to a body. Near the opening sat a plastic water jug, the kind with a screw cap and a molded handle. It was cloudy and yellowed from sun exposure. Around the opening were deep grooves and punctures. The plastic was chewed and crushed inward. The marks were not random. They were spaced evenly, curved, and set in 2 rows. Human teeth, not animal. Too wide, too flat, too deliberate. There were no other items inside. No food, no clothes, no tools, no trash. just the sleeping bag and the jug. The tent floor showed darker patches where moisture or sweat had soaked through repeatedly. The dirt beneath was packed down harder than the surrounding ground, like it had been occupied for a long time. We backed away and stood there longer than felt right. The headlamps made the canvas glow weakly. The darkness beyond pressed close. There was still no sound, not even wind. Back at our camp, everything looked the same as we'd left it. Our tents sat where we pitched them. Gear was untouched. I went back to shooting, but the sense of distance was gone. The sky felt lower. Every exposure felt longer. The darkness between shots felt thicker. Sometime later, after the cameras were put away and we were inside our tents, a sound started that didn't belong. A soft scrape, fabric shifting, the slow pull and release of material under tension. The sound came from outside, close, then farther, then close again. It wasn't steady. It didn't follow a rhythm. It wasn't wind. There was no wind. The scrub outside was still. The air was heavy and cold. The sound moved around us, never touching our tent, never pulling at the fabric, just close enough to hear. Then it stopped. I didn't sleep. I lay there counting breaths, listening for footsteps, for breathing, for anything that would explain the sound. Nothing came. Hours passed like that, measured only by the slow lightening of the sky. When morning came, the cold broke suddenly. Heat rushed back in as soon as the sun cleared the horizon. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The ground looked different in daylight, every detail sharp and obvious. That was when I saw it. One of our tents had moved. The second tent, not mine, sat closer to the old canvas one now. Not dragged roughly, not tipped or collapsed. It had been picked up and set down again, aligned carefully, stakes reset, corners squared. The distance between it and the canvas tent was now less than 10 yards. There were still no footprints, no disturbed dirt, no marks showing how it had been moved. The stakes were driven in clean, rocks placed back on top. It looked intentional and careful. The canvas tent stood exactly where it had been, unchanged, patient. We packed up fast. No extra movements, no photos, no checking gear twice, just breaking camp and walking back to the vehicle under the growing heat. I didn't look back until the tents were out of sight. We didn't take the canvas tent down. We didn't touch it again. Leaving it there felt safer than interfering. Like removing it would be a mistake. The drive out felt longer. The dirt road looked different in daylight, more worn than it should have been, like more people used it than the map suggested. When we reached pavement, the tension in my shoulders finally eased, but it didn't leave completely. Weeks later, I checked satellite images of the area out of habit. I zoomed in to the exact spot using landmarks and shadows. The red dirt was still there, the scrub still thin and spaced, but there was no tent, no dark shape, no canvas outline, nothing to suggest anything had ever been set up there at all. I still look sometimes. The images update. The land stays empty. What bothers me isn't that the tent disappeared. It's that it was ever there in the first place, placed with care in a spot chosen for the sky, used long enough to wear the ground flat, and then left behind without a trace of how it got there or how it moved. Some places aren't empty because no one goes there. Some places are empty because someone already did.